Okay, so here is the actual Krebs cycle. This image just calls it the citric acid cycle. I'll show you why in a little while, but it's the Krebs cycle, named after Hans Krebs. I always like to give people credit. I actually had Hans Krebs, like great grandson, in my class like 5 or 6 years ago. So I like to say Krebs cycle. All right, here's our acetyl. Oh, let me get my little sucker here, little laser pointer. Okay, so here's our acetyl that was from the prep stage, that 2-carbon molecule. And that 2-carbon molecule, so we have 2 carbons left. So clearly we're going to make 2 CO2s. That 2-carbon molecule enters into the Krebs cycle here. This is found in the matrix of the mitochondria. And that is going to produce, and this image only shows the production, just shows the products. It doesn't show all the like sort of nitty gritty steps, which I don't really want you to worry about. So ultimately, this is going to, just from this one acetyl here, we're going to produce 2 CO2s, and that should make sense, right? Because we have 2 carbons here. So 1 carbon for 1 carbon dioxide, the other carbon for the other carbon dioxide. So we're going to make 2 CO2s. And then through this process, we're going to do a lot of oxidation, right? We're going to do a lot of breaking of bonds and releasing of hydrogens and electrons. So we're going to ultimately make 3 NADHs. We're actually going to make an ATP here. And we're going to make 1 FADH2. I haven't talked about FADH2. FADH2 is just like NADH, except for the fact that it is a lower energy molecule. Sort of think about like the difference between Niagara Falls, right? The water flowing off of Niagara Falls, like, and the energy you would get from that, and maybe something like Wacona Falls, right? The energy is a little bit different, right? One is much higher than the other one, and the one is producing, Niagara Falls is producing much more energy than Wacona Falls, let's say. So NADH produces a little bit more energy than FADH2 does. We make a way more NADH than we do FADH2. So remember, this is the one tricky thing. You have to multiply all your products by 2. So in reality, we made 4 CO2s here. We made 6 NADHs here. We made 2 ATPs. And we made 2 FADHs, FADH2. Remember, that's because there was 2 acetyls who come through, because ultimately there were 2 pyruvates. So remember, we have to multiply everything by 2, but I'm going to give you a nice list of all of our products. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to go back to your notes, and I want you to count up from the prep stage and the Krebs cycle. Don't include glycolysis in this yet. I want you to count up for each of the 2 pyruvates that we made, how many ATPs, how many FADH2s, how many CO2s, and how many NADH molecules do we make from the prep stage and the Krebs cycle. So pause this right now and then come back when you're ready with your answer. Okay, I'm ready to click in the answers. Here we go. So we make a total of 2 ATPs. That's only made in the Krebs cycle. 2 FADH2s, once again, just in the Krebs cycle. We make a total of 6 CO2s. Remember, there are 2 in the prep stage, 4 in the Krebs cycle. And we make 8 NADHs. Look at that. We're building them up now. Those are the superstars, remember, don't forget. So we made 2 NADHs in the prep stage and 6 in the Krebs cycle. Believe it or not, that last slide brings me so much joy. It reminds me of my education at Syracuse back in the day. But I do like the detail in that, but that is beyond anything we need to do here. So let's just add up everything so far. So in glycolysis, we made 2 ATP, 2 NADHs, and 2 pyruvates. In the prep stage and the Krebs cycle, we made 2 ATP, 8 NADHs, 2 FADH2s, and 6 CO2s. So a couple of interesting points here. Let me get my little Whoozy Watsa. All right. We only made 4 ATPs total so far. The glucose molecule is gone. There's none left. There's no more potential energy to suck out of anywhere. It's all gone. So we've only made 4 ATPs for one glucose molecule. And as a complex trillion-celled organism, that's just not enough. But what we did do is we made 10 NADHs, and that is where what we're gonna use to cash in, and we're gonna pay off. We're gonna make a bunch of ATP because of these 10 NADHs that we have here, and FADH2. It's gonna make some ATP for us also. And like I said, we don't have any more carbon left, right? Our whole glucose molecule has been oxidized. So this carbon dioxide here has now been extracted from the glucose molecule and is now going to be breathed into the environment by all organisms that do cellular respiration, which is pretty much everybody. Okay, so try these out, pause the show, and then once you're ready, then move on to the next slide. Hopefully you did well. There are the answers. All right. Once again, just make sure you save those questions that you might have and ask. Or you can email me them too. You don't have to Zoom if you don't want to. So finally, we're going to talk a little bit about oxygen. So the process of making a lot of ATP, so far we've only made 4 ATPs, not a lot, right? We need to get more dollar bills from our $100 bill, right? We need to get more ATP out of that glucose molecule. So the very last stage of cellular respiration happens on this thing called the electron transport chain in the mitochondria. And it's called oxidative phosphorylation. And what's happening here is we're using the power of oxidation. It sounds like those OxyClean commercials. We're using the power of oxidation to phosphorylate ADP into ATP. I'm going to show you that a little bit more in a little bit. But what has to happen here is that we need to have oxygen in order for this to happen. This is an aerobic process, and we need to have oxygen for it to happen. So this is how we make the majority of our ATP. So I was thinking of this today as I went with my neighbors. We kept safe distance, and we climbed to the top of Pittsfield State Forest, straight up. It was incredible. And halfway through this hike, I was breathing heavy. My lungs were burning. It was really hard. I was breathing really hard, and I was sweating. And that is all a sign that my mitochondria are working, because what's happening there is the more energy that I need, the more ATP that I need to twitch my muscles to get me up to the top of that mountain, the more oxygen I need to pull the electrons through the process, right? So the more energy I need, the more oxygen I need in my system to break that glucose molecule down into that ATP. So that makes sense why you breathe heavy when you're running on a treadmill or you're doing something that requires a lot of energy, because the oxygen's needed in the process, ultimately needed in the process to break that sugar molecule down. So oxygen, very important. Doesn't play a role until the very, very end, but that's super, super important. So the electron transport chain is one of my favorite, I like teaching the electron transport chain, but one of my most favorite things to teach in biology is ATP synthase. I find it to be the most fascinating part of cellular respiration, and is one of my favorite proteins. Doesn't everybody have a favorite protein? So just to recap what the last slide said and the video talked about that you probably have already watched, hopefully you went back and watched it, is that all that NADH and FADH2 are going to come and they're going to drop off all of these hydrogen ions, and those hydrogen ions are going to build up on this other side of the membrane. Remember, the mitochondria has a double membrane. So all these hydrogen ions build up on one side of the membrane because the NADH they drop them off. So NADH drops off the H and becomes NAD and goes back and gets some more hydrogens, right? So it gets oxidized and reduced and oxidized and reduced. So it's going to drop, they're going to drop off all those hydrogens. And since there's more hydrogen on one side of the membrane than the other, so you're going to remember your information about diffusion, because there's a higher concentration of hydrogen ions on this side of the membrane versus this side of the membrane, what's going to happen is those hydrogen ions are going to go through their channel. They have their own specific channel which they'll move. Just like you will have, every molecule has their own sort of channel or canal that they go through. Very rarely can any molecules just go straight through the plasma membrane. Remember, those lipids don't like for things to just come through them. It'd be like somebody just walking through the walls into your house, right? Everybody has to go through the door, right? The front door or the back door or wherever they're going, but they have to go through a door. So in this video, you can see that this amazing protein that has been around for billions of years, and it is looks just like a turbine, right? My brother runs a New York Power Authority. He doesn't run the whole power authority. He runs one of the turbines on Long Island, and I always joke with him that ATP synthase is the OG turbine. So what's going to happen here is the hydrogen ions are going to go through the molecule, and it's going to cause it to spin. You see the rotor spinning here? This is literally a protein spinning like this. And that spinning will couple, right? Will couple or attach, ADP, which is adenosine diphosphate. You see there's only two P's on the end there. And it'll attach this PI, inorganic phosphate, to each other, and it will produce ATP, right? ATP, adenosine triphosphate. You see that there's those three phosphates on the end here. So that's called energy coupling, or the coupling of ADP to inorganic phosphate to make ATP. This is a protein that's embedded in our mitochondria. Lots of organisms, the majority of organisms have these if they have mitochondria. Even some prokaryotes have them too, have this ATP synthase. And it is just fascinating. And then this is how we are able to make as much ATP as we do. Okay, so this slide seems like a lot on it, and I agree it is, but it's really it's quite clear on what's happening here. So we have our NADHs dropping off the electrons. Right, the electrons flow right through because they're so little. They can flow through the membrane space. But the hydrogen ions, look what happens to them. They go through these protein channels, right, and then they start to build up on the outer part here, this intermembrane space, and they create what, if you read it in your book, it's called the proton motive force. They're going to build up. There's going to be a high concentration of hydrogen ions on this intermembrane space. And that's going to cause them, because there's going to be a high concentration, molecules move from high to low. Right? We know that already. They're going to go through ATP synthase. This is a much more generalized view of ATP synthase as compared to the last slide. And they're going to come through here. It's going to cause it to rotate. And that rotation is going to couple ADP to inorganic phosphate to make ATP. Right? So this is what we call oxidative phosphorylation. This NADH picked up the hydrogens and electrons that were oxidized, right? Because glucose was oxidized. They picked them up, dropped them off. We used the power of that, caused the spinning of this ATP synthase, and it coupled ADP with ATP to make ATP. Right? So that is That is how we make our ATPs. We're going to calculate the numbers in a little while in the next slide. And then finally, here it is. Here's our oxygen. There she blows. There's the oxygen. What's going to happen here is all these hydrogens that are going to come through are going to eventually attach to oxygen and make water. So water is a byproduct of cellular respiration. Remember, carbon dioxide and water are the products of cellular respiration. So there's the water finally. So these electrons that get flown through here, they all attach to oxygen and the hydrogens, and they make water. Fascinating. Good stuff. All right, so now you need to put your math hats on, but it's not the most terrible math, but let's just think mathematically now. So for every NADH that gets brought to the electron transport chain, that little stage I just showed you, for every NADH you make 3 ATPs. It has enough potential energy to make 3 ATPs, and those FADH2s have enough to make 2 ATPs. For every FADH2 you make 2 ATPs. All right, so here let's just add it all up. I know there's a lot of numbers on here, but let's add it all up. So you can see glycolysis and prep stage. We already covered those guys. But let's look at our totals here. So for, let me get my little dial. Coming. Hold on. There it is. All right. So we made 10 NADHs total. So 2 in glycolysis, 2 in the prep stage, 6 in the Krebs cycle. So 10 NADHs. And 2 FADH2s. So this is where we're cashing in the electron transport chain. So those 10 and 2 electron carriers went to the electron transport chain. They cashed in that potential energy and made, so for the 10 NADHs, you make 30 ATPs. Remember, 1 NADH can make 3 ATPs. And then FADH2 cashed in and made 4 ATPs. So that gives you 34 ATPs just in the electron transport chain, right? Because remember, after glycolysis and the Krebs cycle, we only made 4 ATP. That's it. That's not enough, right? That's definitely not enough. So now that we have those 34 ATP plus these 4 ATP, it brings our total to about 38 ATP from one glucose molecule. So we started with that unusable glucose molecule that had a lot of potential energy, more potential energy than any of the molecules we've talked about, and it produced 38 ATP from it. We do lose some ATP from the process of moving into the mitochondria, right? Some of that is an active transport process. So we do. So sometimes you'll see books will say 36 to 38 ATPs are made per glucose molecule, which is fair. So just a little bit more about oxygen. Oxygen is, you'll often see it referred to as the final electron acceptor because it is what is pulling all the electrons through the process. Remember, it's very electron greedy. If you think of the Bohr model, if you can, I gave you this cute little image of oxygen. I just kind of found this. It's kind of cool. If you think of the Bohr model of oxygen, it has 6 valence electrons, so it wants 2 more electrons. So it's very electron greedy. So it is going to take those electrons that are flowing, that were stripped from the glucose molecule, that flow all the way through to the mitochondria, onto that membrane space, through the electron transport chain, and they ultimately end up with oxygen. So that's why they're called the final electron acceptor. And so this is why we breathe. We breathe oxygen literally so that we can suck all those electrons through the electron transport chain in the mitochondria so that we can make ATP. All right, give this a try. Pause the show until you have it all answered and then start it again. I hope you got them all right. It's a lot. I get it. Okay, so you guys have made it to the end of this PowerPoint. I want you to keep watching videos. I think that watching this once probably isn't enough. You probably need to watch it multiple times, watch multiple videos. So that would probably be very, very helpful for you. And I'm going to hold Zoom office hours for you so that you can ask questions on some of the basic concepts. Remember, this chapter quiz is open book and open notes. It's already available for you to see. So hopefully this PowerPoint helped you answer those questions. And I hope this method works for us in the state of affairs that we're in right now. I hope this works for you. I would love some feedback from you if you want me to go slower or faster. Sometimes it's difficult since I know the topic very well, sometimes I'm not sure if I am going too fast or going too slow. So feedback would be great. I'll try to make these PowerPoints as fun for you and tell some more stories. I didn't tell too many stories today, but I love to tell a good story. But one thing I did find is this, I don't know, at the very end of making this PowerPoint, I found this way to insert all sorts of cute little things. So I found one final one for you. And all right, cellular respiration.